Hello and welcome to Financial Footsteps. My name is Chad Dean, your host, and I am a recruiter now for 27 years. I am the owner of Integrated Management Resources. We are an accounting and finance focused recruiting firm based out of Scottsdale, Arizona. Financial Footsteps, we interview financial leaders and learn about their careers, creating a repository for students and people younger in their careers that want to follow in the footsteps of these leaders. And today I'm very honored to have our guest, Ingmar Berg. Welcome, Ingmar.
Thank you, Chad. Great to be here.
I appreciate it. So let's start off. Let's tell the audience a little bit about yourself and where you grew up, and tell us about your Texas accent and a little bit about your family and your hobbies.
Yeah, I don't know about a Texas accent, but I am new to the Valley, or relatively new. Came here last year from Boston, but originally I am from Sweden, where I grew up. Went to high school and university, and then did grad school in London. So, and I lived in this is my 14th city, I think, and I've been living in 6 countries and 4 states here in the U.S. So I've had the opportunity to move around a lot, which has been great.
That's fantastic. And have you moved a family around with you as well?
Yep, every time. The first time I moved, I didn't have family, but since then we dragged first my wife and then the kids along. And now the kids are in college, so they didn't have to make this move.
Empty nesters.
Yep, and enjoying it.
So where are they currently?
So one is in Miami University, and the other one is at American University in Washington, D.C.
That's fantastic. Either one of them want to follow in your footsteps of accounting and finance?
Maybe the younger one. We'll
Interesting.
see. We'll see.
Well, that's pretty cool. So take us back early on in your life when you're growing up in Sweden or wherever it was at that particular time, where you made the decision to make a career in accounting and finance.
Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, it was very clear, I think, from fairly early on in high school that I wanted to be in business, which is a broad topic. And I always liked numbers, and I was pretty good in math. So it's sort of starting. And then I studied finance and accounting at the university, both at undergraduate, and I have a master's degree from London School of Economics in international accounting and finance. So it was pretty clear that from an early stage. Now, then, actually, my career started very differently. I joined a company that I worked for during the summers, which was a student travel organization based in Sweden, but offices all across Europe. And they were sending junior high school kids most of them going to England to learn English. Anyway, so I worked there in the summer in the different destinations in England. And then when I finished grad school in 91, it was a challenging work environment at that time. So I actually started working for that company, helping the then president in sort of growth ambitions we had. And that's how I started. So I was much more into sales, marketing, growth, and some sort of operational areas, not at all involved in finance and accounting. And then it just happened. So after 3 months in that job, this guy who was my boss, he resigned and moved to the U.S. And he and I will touch points later. I'll tell you about that later in discussion. And anyway, so the owner of the company told me, who was 3 months out of grad school and into the job, say, "Hey, you've been here now 3 months, so why don't you take over as the president of this division?" And I was like, "Okay, that sounds great." And there we go. So there was, a lot of focus on marketing, sales, growth, operational things, as I mentioned. And then we started expanding into this was in 1991. So the Soviet Union had collapsed, the Iron Curtain came down. So we expanded into the new economies, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, which then started to open up and set up offices there, as well as in Paris and Germany. So we quickly expanded. And it was a great experience to learn business from inside
absolutely.
out.
So your degree, it says economics, accounting, and finance. That's that's pretty broad. Is that intentional? Because when I interview somebody with a U.S. education, it's accounting or it's finance only. This is very broad. Is that?
Yeah, it's while I was at LSE, it was a mixture of both. It was both finance and accounting. Actually, when I think back way, and I'm not sure that's a European thing necessarily. You certainly can specialize even more in finance or even more in accounting. I was never really interested in the pure accounting part of it. So, for example, I don't have a CPA. I never worked in public accounting. That I was not interested in that, but I do know enough about how balance sheets and cash flows and income statement works and hang together. So I have a good grasp of that. But I was more interested maybe in the operational as well as financial piece of it. I'm much more of an FP&A type of guy than I am an accountant, if you
Right.
will.
Right. But so what was that genesis? Was it did you know what you wanted to do when you grew up, or did you get into school and choose? Do you, and in Europe, do you have to choose immediately? Do you choose after 2 years like we do here?
No, you choose. I mean, you even choose in high school. You can specialize in science or economics or more broader social studies or engineering, even at a high school level. So you're much more focused early on. I mean, for example, if you're going to be a lawyer, you go straight to law school after high school. So there's a much shorter avenue to get to the end point. But it was, I was pretty clear on, not 100% clear exactly what kind of job I wanted to have. When I was in London, I really wanted to get into investment banking, but the market tanked the year I graduated. So it was like, okay, nobody's hiring, so better figure something else out. And that's when this other opportunity came up. But the one thing that I think early on, even way before high school, is like I really wanted to go overseas, and I've always had this dream when I was really small. Like, I want to go to America. That's where the future is.
Really?
It took me, when I was turned 30, I moved there for the first time. So, but I had this dream of moving and to move to California, particularly. But it's easy to like California when you watch movies in Europe.
All the surfer girls and
Right.
everything like that, right?
The weather, everything. So the cars and all the rest of it.
Yeah. How did your family feel about you moving to the U.S.?
I think they were twofold: excited as well as, so of course it's a long way from home. But my dad run a travel agency, so we traveled a lot already from being not so far, mostly in Europe and around there. But I think they realized, like, I just want to have an international career. I just love meeting different people, living in different cultures, and I was been very lucky that actually became the case at the end of the day. I mean, yeah, 6 countries is maybe not that much, but it's more than most.
That's bold. That's very bold to move into these different cultures
Right.
and have to recreate your network every time. That's so bold and fascinating.
Yeah, that is the flip side of it, right? Because if I'd stayed in Sweden, or maybe I stayed in somewhere in Europe for the rest of my life, or for a long period of my life, you build networks. Like, when you move, like we have a lot, right? That's the hardest part, right? But that makes our family so much stronger too. And my wife and I are kidding, like, we have commitment issues, but not with each other, but more to where to live. Every time we move, it's like after a few years, like, okay, where should we go next? So
Wanderlust. That's what you
Right.
guys have. You have wanderlust. That I'm jealous. I've lived in a few different places. I lived in Europe. I lived at just outside of Madrid. But living in 6 different countries, that's fascinating. To learn the cultures and really be embedded, that's where you really get to know
Right.
the cultures. And I find that's really neat. So how do you feel that the education prepared you for your career? And knowing what you know now, would you have done anything different?
I tend to not regret things, but the one thing I wish I did more of was to learn languages. I mean, I used to be fluent in German. I lived there for a period of time after high school. I feel like I had decent English, but I wish I learned French. I took that some in school, and maybe some Italian, but that's the one thing I really wish I did. It's better when I was younger, because it's so much easier to learn languages when you're younger. It's harder when you get older, particularly when we lived in Switzerland. But again, in most of Europe, English is so common, and people want to speak English with you if they're not native speakers. No, I'm not a native speaker, but that's the language I can talk most in, except Swedish. And for example, when we moved to Sweden for 4 years, my wife, who's American but with French and British parents, She was trying to learn Swedish, but every time she opened her mouth, like, "Oh, you're from America," and then they started talking English to her, so it was like impossible to learn. And I said, "Don't waste your time. It's a language spoken by 10 million people, and you know, and 90% of the Swedish people speak very good English anyway. So it was only my dad who didn't speak English. So they had fun conversations between the two of them during the years, for as long as he was alive."
Right. So you kind of touched on it a little bit, but tell us about your first job in accounting and finance, and what you learned.
So let me think back here. So I joined that company in Sweden, as I mentioned, and after 4 years, my predecessor had moved to San Francisco. The company he started working for, they came to me and asked if I wanted to move to San Francisco and start working from there. It was also a language travel company, but for older students, sort of pre-college. And again, my dream then of wanted to move to the U.S. in general, and California in particular, even though I was not 100% sure about the job, I was like, I can't miss this opportunity, because if things doesn't work out, I can always go home. So I took my stuff and I moved there in 1995. It's a long time ago now, but anyway. And I started off more in operational, but also financial controls there. And that's kind of when I started to drifting back towards my education field. And then after about a year and a half, the owners of that company decided to sell it. And I was then put in charge of building a financial model. In those days, you go out 5 or 6 years and then starting to, and I built that, and then, doing the roadshow. This is, a long time ago, where you had data rooms of binders to do due diligence. Now everything is online, or up in the air in the cloud. And we had roadshows, investors came to meet us and we presented. And so that's really the turning point for me, going into much more of a financial. And at the end of the day, the company was acquired by at that time, a publicly traded company out of Baltimore. It's called Sylvan Learning Systems. And I became a VP of finance for that division, or that company then that they bought ultimately. And then it turned out that was really in the financial role. And so my educational background obviously was helpful and suitable, but also my business experience, how to run a business. So I'm always sort of, my CFO role has always come from a business forward-looking angle, but I do have a lot of respect for accounting. And every time I've gone, it's about shortening the close cycle. When I came here, for example, that they closed the books on 15, 20 days, whatever. I said 5 days. We got to get there, and we got to get there quickly, because then we have 15 days to do other stuff. So I have to get the books closed accurately and in a timely fashion. That's super important. But that's why I always hire really strong controllers to take care of that. So then I can use the data and think about the future. And if there's any area I like to be more hands-on in, is the FP&A side of it.
Were you ever overwhelmed? Because you took on so much responsibility, it seems like, early on, and then you're moving into a new culture. Were you ever overwhelmed?
Oh, I'm sure I was at times, when there's a lot of deadlines and stuff. And there was a period of time, I remember, when we lived in Switzerland and we were going to move to Hong Kong, and I had to go to Australia for 10 days, come back to Switzerland for 2 days, and then jump on the plane to go to India for like 3-4 days, and then came back. And then 2 days later, we moved to Hong Kong. So the fact that my wife didn't kill me is still a miracle. And then you land in Hong Kong, and I was still doing my old job as well as my new job. So there was a period of time there where it was extremely stressful, and it was hard to get any sleep, because, when you have a company that's based in the US and you're in a time zone that's 12 hours ahead, that means that every night you're on a conference call. And then after that, you're so fired up, so you can't go to sleep. So that was probably the worst time in my life. And that was 2008, where it was it was challenging, both work-wise, and then having 2 small kids in a new country. And my God bless my wife, she was an angel. And then she's always find job after 3, 4, 5, 6 months, wherever we landed. She's phenomenal in that sense.
How did you cope with all that stress?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what I try to do sometimes when I really stress, I write stuff down. This is what I have to do. And I write stuff down to what I've done. And that's what I try to coach people sometimes when they're really stressed, is at the end of the day, think about what you actually accomplished, because it's a lot more than you think. You tend to think about the stuff you haven't done, but don't forget the stuff you've done. And then write down what you need to do the next morning and try to be very, very structured. And also you have to be disciplined and be really good in prioritization. I had a boss once who, even though he was a kind of a terrible person, but he had one saying that I never forget. It's like, always know your number one priority. Always know your number one priority. And, as much as I can, I try to follow that, because it's good advice. Like, there's only one thing that's most important right now. Let's get that done.
That's great advice. What I do for myself is I focus on what I already have and be grateful for that in that moment.
Right.
And just be like, look, I can accomplish all of this just by relaxing and being thankful for what I have, and being thankful for the fact that I'm even in this situation to be stressed, because a lot of people maybe don't have that opportunity. So I turned it into an opportunity as opposed to a tremendous amount of stress, because you can let it overwhelm you, and then you wake up at 2 a.m, you're trying to solve problems, and you don't sleep, and then it just turns into a bad cycle.
And I do think, even though I'm not following my own advice all the time, but eat right, exercise, and especially what I learned living here now, especially in the summer, I have to drink a ton of water.
That's a fact.
And just take care of yourself.
Yep.
I think that's helped too. But that everyone has their own way how to deal with stress, right? But I like to, if I can write stuff down, at least I don't forget it, because it was a period of time too, right? But I kept a notepad on my nightstand, because I woke up in the middle of the night. If I wrote down, then it was easy to go back to sleep, because at least next day I will see what I needed to do.
Good idea. So tell us about your first experience managing people, and what do you wish you knew before you started managing people?
Yeah, that was probably the flip side of when I got that promotion so early on, as I was, a young person in an immature manager. And so I probably was not the best listener, and managing by example was probably the only thing I could do. And then the owner of the company was a very smart, innovative entrepreneur, but not a good manager. So I didn't really have a good role model either. So learning by doing. So if there's anything that I wish I could have done differently, maybe would have been to get some better training how to manage people early on. And it takes time to get that. And I think now obviously with 30 plus years experience, I'm a very different manager now than I was when I started. I was probably very hard and set high expectations and had zero tolerance for mistakes, which is not a good recipe. Everyone makes mistakes, myself included, and you can allow people to do that. Now, if somebody starts making the same mistake over and over, you might have a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that was probably, I was not ready for that from a managerial perspective. I had all the drive in the world and we got stuff done, but I think there was left some scars on people.
Mm-hmm. Did you have to interview for any of these roles, or were you more appointed?
Most of the time in my career, I have been appointed, but there's been a couple of jobs. This one I have right now, for example, they went through a very rigorous interview process with first a recruiter that found me, and then with the management team. And they follow a process, somebody called GH Smart, which is very detailed and very deep dive. And I think they talked to 6 or 7 references. So it's a very thorough process. But yeah, that was certainly a very thorough interview process. Same thing when I joined Manpower Group years ago. They also went through an interview process with management and their HR team. Other than that, most of my jobs have been sort of appointed or career moves within the corporation where I was.
Why do you think you were appointed? What was it about you that made you the one, as opposed to going outside and hiring somebody else or hiring a peer?
Well, I think in the beginning, people look at what you do and how you do things and how you work and what you accomplish. And, especially when you're in a high growth company that I was with Sylvan then, that acquired that company I was working for in San Francisco. They were shifting their focus to going to international higher education, and they needed people to support that. And the other side of that story, or part of that story, is the company they acquired, what I became the VP of finance for. After only about a year, it wasn't doing so well. They decided to sell it, and they said to me, "So you got to go sell it again." And I said, "Okay, I'll sell the same company twice." I wish I had more equity though, but anyway. So, and then they said, "But we're starting this new division, and we like you to join it." And I think they just, like any people you have around you that work for you, there are people that stick out, and they get it. They're harder workers. They're get stuff done, et cetera, et cetera. They have potential and so forth. So I think it's just, I mean, sports people say, or golfers say, for example, you're only good as your last shot. And it's like, you're only good as your last job.
Mm-hmm. Now, today's society is more focused, especially since the pandemic, on work-life balance.
Oh, yeah.
In Sweden, growing up, was there work-life balance? Was that a topic?
I wouldn't say so, even though Sweden probably, especially on equality between men and women, they were early on there. And I think the whole Scandinavia and then Europe was much more equal between men and women, I think, early on. But it's sort of work-life balance. I said my dad, when he started out, he was a journalist, and then he started his travel business. So he was writing newspaper articles at night and then running his business during the day. So I think I grew up with sort of, you have to get stuff done and you have to work hard. And my mother was a teacher in math and history, and was equivalent of junior high, but also did other stuff and worked in the business on the side. So I think if I had any, not necessarily scars from there, but what I learned from an early age was like, you got to work hard to get anywhere in the world. And obviously this was, I'm born in 1965. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s, if you will. And if there was work-life balance in Sweden, I wouldn't have known it.
I wonder if that's disappearing in today's society, the hard work and the belief that it does take hard work, because there's so much that the younger generation, and I have younger kids than you, that and I teach mine hard work. I make them work and do chores and things along those lines. But there's this perception of easy money, and you look on the internet and there's all these people that are flaunting how much money they make and how easy it was and stuff like that. So I wonder if there's a cultural shift away from that hard work mentality that this country and many countries were built on. I wonder if that's going away. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so, because at the end of the day, some of these, fast earners were creating quick wealth shortly, like influencers that, I personally have a hard time really understanding what value are they adding, but hey, the market decides, right? So who am I to judge? But I think the underlying is that you have to work hard. And I always think about, business people or sports people or, musicians. Was Tiger Woods a talented golfer? For sure. Did he work the hardest? Probably. And so, and I think, staying on the golf team here, Rory McIlroy, is he a talented golfer? Yeah, sure. I actually know somebody who grew up with him, and yeah, he was talented, but he works like crazy, right? Is Keith Richards a good guitarist? Yeah. Did he have some talent? Sure. But he worked really, really, really hard. I read his book, Life, and that was the one thing that blew me away, how hard he worked to learn how to play guitar in different ways. And so I think, yeah, you can win the lottery, but most people who do, they spoil away the money very quickly anyway. And you can create some short-term, I think, income by being an influencer, but is that a sustainable way to earn money? I always think that, if you work hard enough, but you got to work smart too. I think that's the biggest difference today, right? Back in your days, when, long before internet, you spend a lot more time getting stuff done because you didn't have the tools that we have today. And I do think work-life balance is important, right? Because you have to have, and I think you can have both. You can have success, work hard, and of course, you look like people who really create wealth in a short time, like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Bill Gates. But they are they don't have a work-life balance, or they create whatever balance they want, right? But I think they're obsessed with work, right? They're wired that way. And I've seen some people like that maybe haven't created as much wealth as those guys, but certainly a lot. And they're just consumed with work, and that's who they are. But I think it's different when you're leading an organization as opposed to you being, 3, 4, 5 levels down, right? If you expect people to work that much, well, if you pay them, great. But I think it's more important today. And I remember when I came to the U.S. the first time, it was a little bit like, the person who spends the most hours in the office is the best, and that's not necessarily true, right? It's the person who's actually using their and other times most effectively are the best, right? And I actually had a conversation with my CEO a while, and I said, actually, your main job or your main responsibility is to make sure that we use the resources we have effectively and efficiently. And because in our line of business, and I'm sure it's in yours, right, it's all about people. We buy computers and we have an office, but that's, our balance sheet is our people and our brand name.
Yeah, that's the wealth of an organization is in its people.
Right. But yeah, I kind of say to non-financial people, like every night the balance sheet walks home and you pray they come back the next day.
You brought up a great point, which is the face time in the office isn't as important as it used to be. And what also is fascinating, you said that you had rooms full of data in the 80s and 90s where you had to go in and find all this information. Now all this information's at our fingertips, and our efficiency to do the same amount of work has gone through the roof. We can get now more work done because of the efficiencies of data that is much more easily accessible. And when I would I'd joke with my kids that, they're doing homework and they're asking ChatGPT what the answer to their biology question is, where I had to open a book or go to the library and find the book, then open the book and then go to the index. And then, so it's just amazing what we have.
And I think
today.
that's an area which is exciting and interesting, but also concerning, because when it comes to education, which I'm a big fan of, are you studying to pass the exam or are you studying to learn?
That's fact.
ChatGPT is an issue in the academic world, particularly higher education, because I think that's a big concern, because it's great to get good test scores, but you haven't learned anything then.
Mm-hmm. But one thing about that, you mentioned that Keith Richards is an excellent guitarist, but he worked really hard. If you ask him if that was work, do you think his answer would be, yeah, it's work? Or is it what he's passionate about, what he's doing? He loves it.
Right.
So I joke that I love talking to people. I love interviewing people. I love making the connection between a company and a candidate. We match the culture, we match the comp, and that candidate goes in. And then 6 months down the road, I call them and they're like, I love it here. Thank you so much for this.
Right.
That right there to me is not work. So anything that I do, really, I would consider probably managing to KPIs when somebody's not hitting their numbers and they're doing the same thing over and over again. That to me is work. But calling people and talking with people and making the connections, to me, that's not work. So I joke that maybe I work 2 hours a week. The rest of the time is doing what I'm passionate about. And if you're passionate about something, it does not feel like work.
No, of course he was super passionate about, music and guitaring, and, and we all know how successful he and Jagger has been right over the years. So of course it's passion. And I think that's important to bring into your work too, right? If you're miserable every day, you're in the wrong place. Now,
right.
I have days when, you're not too happy, and that's fine, right? We're all people, but I think you have to have an underlying passion for what you do, the industry you've chosen. And I'm so grateful I chose an industry, or happened to stumble in more or less industry of education in different shape and forms, right? Because we are, we're truly changing lives through education. And I believe it's so important wherever you are, that if you can educate people to the highest possible level, then the world has a chance to be in a better place.
That's something you can really sink your teeth into
Right.
for a career. That's very honorable. I wonder if you can teach kids passion or if it's innate in the individual.
That's a good question. I think you can at least sort of point people in direction or help them understand what they're doing is valuable and it has a meaning. But of course, you have to develop a passion from the inside too. I think it comes from your inside. I mean, why do people choose to play different sport, for example? Well, it could be all kinds of reasons. My uncle played soccer, so I'm going to do that too, or whatever. But I think and the same with business, and sometimes it's a little bit. In my case, did I choose? Did I think about I'm going to go into the education field? No, I never even thought about that, but it sort of came, and I think that's what happens to a lot of people. And either you really become passionate about it, or then you move on to do something else, or you want to try something else. Like I tried different industries, which I've been happy to do too, right? But I do know that education is, it has a lot of meaning. And the other thing too, which great with education, nothing is recession proof, but education is pretty close. I worked through, 2009, for example. The company I worked for in the education field was owned by KKR. We were the best performing asset in 2009 because education people need education.
Absolutely. So you didn't actually interview for leadership titles until a little bit later in your career, but what advice would you give to someone interviewing for their very first leadership position?
I think, especially with my own experience, I think it's important to demonstrate that you can lead and motivate people, because being a lone wolf is not that hard, right? You just bury your head down and you do work. But if you're going to lead people, you have to get them to follow you, or at least, in sort of in the order or sense of direction, and get them to be productive, efficient, and all the rest of the stuff. To be able to create a positive team environment, I think is very important for a leader. Because, as a leader, you're not necessarily going to, you're not going to do people's job because either you're going to do it and you don't need them, or they're not capable of doing what you hired them to do. So then you need to find somebody else. So I think it's about, it doesn't mean that, I'm happy to roll up my sleeves whenever I need to, right? But for me to do a job that could be done by somebody at a lower cost, I have to make sure that person works out, right? It's all about economics at the end of the day. But I certainly have rolled up my sleeve plenty of times when I had to. But I do think getting people to follow is probably and have a positive impact on their, contribution to the company.
How do you motivate people?
When I interview people, there's a couple of things I always say. I am not a micromanager. People who work for me need to be self-motivated, self-driven, and I am happy to help you solve your problems. But when you come to me with a problem, I also want you to at least have thought through some possible ways to solve it. And then if I can't help you, I'll help you find the person who can help you. Every problem has been solved. It's just a matter of finding who solved it, or every challenge. But I do want people to feel like I'm there to support and guide them, but I want them to find their own inner drive, right, to get stuff done. And then when it comes to the other thing I always say to people too, I don't want any surprises. If you made a mistake or something bad happened, come to me right away. I would never hold that against you. But if you are trying to hide something, because eventually it will pop up. My dad taught me that early on. He said, tell the truth right up because it will always come out anyway, just a matter of time. So I want people to feel comfortable that they can make mistakes. That's not a problem. I make them all the time. But bring them out early, or if there's any major problem, right, that come, and then I can help, right? If it don't come up early, then maybe it's too late. The problem just becomes bigger.
So why do people follow you?
Oh, I don't know. You should ask them. Well, I think I am very transparent. I'm very direct. it's, you know, what you see is what you get. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. I mean, I know these are a couple of expressions that you can read in books and stuff like that, but I truly believe that I'm not hard to read, and I'm very direct in all directions, to board members, to seniority, CEOs. I will speak my mind. Now, not being untactful, but I feel like, you know, why shouldn't I? And I think that earns a lot of respect. And I think you asked before, why do I get picked for certain roles? I think there's always been a high level of trust. Like, Ingmar is going to tell us what the real story is. He's not going to sugarcoat it. He's not going to hide anything. He's going to tell us what it is. And I gotten that feedback many, many times. Like, so I think that's part of it, right? They know what they get when they hire me, or when they promoted me. When you go into a new company, obviously they think they know what they get, and hopefully they get what they think they want to get. But when I moved on in previous companies, they know the commodity, right?
I think to me, the most important thing that you said is trust.
Right.
Trust is the basis of every relationship. If that trust is not there, and how do you gain trust? You gain trust by telling the truth.
Right.
You screw up, you own it right away. That's how you gain trust.
Right.
You come to your people, and I always believe that everything rolls up, and so I'm at the helm of the ship. If something goes wrong, it's my fault. Because I should have seen this coming, or I should have prepared the individual better. So I own that, and I think that's why a lot of people they follow me, is because they can trust me. They know that I'm going to be honest with them. So for me, what you said, that key thing there is trust.
Yeah.
That's so important. So you told me a little bit about what you're looking for when you're interviewing somebody. You're looking for somebody that's self-motivated, somebody that's going to be honest with you. Are there any specific questions that you ask to draw that out?
Well, you're trying to ask people for concrete examples. You know, for example, if you made a big mistake, how did you handle that? Who did you go to? And how was the outcome of that conversation, right? If you had a really big challenge and you didn't know how to solve it, how did you approach that? What did you do? Who did you talk to? You know, what was your analysis? And trying to get people to talk about concrete examples that they've done in previous jobs that can respond to the question. Because, you know, there's a lot of good training too, right? Interview training on the other side. So you got to try to cut through that. And I mean, you're a professional recruiter, so you know this better than I do. But I do think that I always try to find some real good examples of that they can demonstrate that this is what I did. And then, of course, you know, reference checking is so important, and to really verify that, you know, that they done what they said. And I think it's important to reference check, you know, people who they worked for, as well as people who work for them. So you got to understand how this person is, because some people are really good managing upwards, but not really good managing downwards.
That's fact. So along lines of what you're saying, as far as coming up with examples of challenges, what I recommend to people is they print out their resume. I'm still a paper person. They print out their resume, and then for each job that's on their resume, they think of a challenge that they had to well, first of all, they think of something that they're really proud of that they accomplished, and then what kind of challenges did they have to overcome to achieve that?
Right.
And so when they do that, they've gone back and they've thought in their history, and they've thought about all this before they go into the interview. So now it's all loaded up into their brain. It's fresh in their mind, and they can talk about it very succinctly. The worst thing you want to do in an interview is somebody asks you a question and you go, "Oh, that's a good question." And then you sit there, and all you're doing at that point is you are delaying, you are trying to come up with an answer, and you're trying to fill the void of silence with your mouth, which is never a good thing. So you want to make sure that you're fully prepared.
You know, it's funny you said that, because I remember reading somewhere is when people are answering a question with, "Oh, that's a really good question," they're only buying time.
Right.
They don't have the answer.
Right.
Just trying to buy time.
Exactly.
So, and I think also, you know, when people talk about whether you've been part of a success or creating success, is really what did you do, right? Because sometimes people are just lucky, right? They roll into a company and things are just going, but they didn't actually do that much, and that's hard to get out of in the interview process. But really trying to understand what the individual did to contribute to whatever the success was.
Mm-hmm. That's good. So if you could go back to the beginning, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Well, no, as I said, well, learning French was one. I had a friend of mine ask, what do you think if you hadn't taken that first job? And I did, and I don't know what I can't relive my life, and I'm pretty happy with what I've accomplished, and having this opportunity to live in so many different cultures is and that suits my personality. Doesn't work for everyone. I have good friends who live in the same time the whole life, and nothing wrong with that. That's just not for me. As far as, I have a master's degree. Should have gone for a PhD. I don't think so. I think I was, I do think advice to people is get the highest level of degree that you possibly can, because an education, especially a higher education degree, can never be taken away from you. You can lose your driver's license. You can be disbarred as a lawyer. You can lose your medical license, but you can't lose your degree. That will be with you for the rest of your life, unless you cheated when you got it. But so I think that's important, right? Education, and there's economic correlation between education and income potential. It's not a guarantee, but income potential.
Well, your passion about education is
Yeah.
to the core. So, and I want to ask you this question because you shared this with me prior to us getting on the podcast. But you said when you graduated in 91, there were no investment banking jobs. That's what you wanted to do. And my question to you would be, well, how do you think things would have turned out differently had you gone into investment banking? But to you, that's not a question that's important. What I think you would say is things happen and I don't have any regrets.
Right.
I know family members, friends that hold regrets their entire life, and it wears on them. It drags them down. It takes energy out of their mind that they could be focusing on something more positive in their life. Where does that come from, and how do you know where that originated? Because that's so important for somebody to learn.
I think that's, we're all different, and people, it's not that I am super positive all the time, right? I certainly have moments where I'm not, productive, where I have not negative thoughts necessarily, but just not, I'm not happy where I am. But
You're human.
Yeah, exactly. I think nature versus nurture, right? How much of that is the nature, the DNA of your mind and your body, and how much of that is influenced by the environment that you grew up in, right? And if you had a lot of negative influencers, how much will that impact your own sort of psychic going forward, and vice versa? If you have a lot of positive influences, how much that impact? I try as hard as I can to be more on the positive side. Doesn't mean that I'm always there for sure, but I don't know. That's probably a question for more of the people to understand the brain more than I do. But I do think, that the environment you grew up in, I think, probably impacts you more than you would think. But then, you go from high school and then you move to another environment, which is college, and then maybe another environment. So you get influences all the time. It's hard to say, but I certainly grew up young in an environment where, working hard was an important thing. My dad's big. Well, I thought it was a joke for him. It was probably dead serious. He asked me once, what is more important, or what's better, Friday afternoon or Friday morning? And before I answered, he said, Friday afternoon, because it's closer to Monday morning. And if you're really lucky, you get to work the weekend too.
Gee, I wonder where your hard work
So
mentality
I was
comes
like, okay,
from.
I got it.
That's funny. So do you think there's anything in your career that, and I think the answer to this is no, just knowing you more now, is there anything that you feel hindered you in your progression in your career?
I can't think. I'm sure there is. And it's interesting now as I reach more of a respectable age. I mean, I'm always up until this job, I think, actually maybe the second to last, been the youngest person on the management team, and now suddenly I find myself the oldest. But that's nothing to do with really hindering. I can't think of anything. I mean, I've been a very much an opportunistic opportunity seeker. So when these different opportunities has come to me like, okay, Ingmar, we're going to send you to Switzerland. It's like, oh, great. Yeah, that'd be fun. And then, oh, now we would send you to Hong Kong. Okay, great. I'll try that. I always had this sort of mentality, like, if it doesn't work out, I can go back to wherever I came from. And so I can't think of anything that's hindered, but I'm sure there's been something.
Okay. Yeah, that's I had a feeling you were going to say that, and I think it goes along the lines of the passion that you have. I want to ask you a question because I was in the same boat when I bought my firm, Integrated Management. I was the youngest person by almost 10 years of all the people that I was managing, and I was self-conscious about that. How do you deal with always being the youngest manager? Were you ever self-conscious about it, and what did you do to change that?
Well, certainly in the early years when I was really young, obviously, I didn't, and as I mentioned before, I didn't really have a good mentor. So, I was trying to manage people. It was hard sometimes too when, I was 25 and I was trying to tell somebody who was 48 to, what they needed to do, right? But I guess you just had to sort of try to focus on the task at hand and what needs to get done for the company in sort of, yeah, I'm half your age or whatever, but I'm still your boss. So, you got to respect that both ways. And I think, as I've grown older, obviously I haven't been so much younger than anybody else anymore. And now I'm the oldest on the
It
management
happens.
team.
It happens.
So it happens quick, right? And it's life.
The imposter syndrome, I think, is what a lot of people feel. And I didn't feel imposter syndrome. I just didn't know how to manage somebody that was 20 years older than me. I just didn't have a clue. I thought, okay, I'm going to run out front and I'm going to show everybody what to do, and they're all going to follow me. And then I look back and I'm like, where is everybody?
Right.
And learning how to motivate people, I found out that you had to actually get to know that person and what made them tick and what was important to them to then be able to motivate them.
Right.
You can't just you can't assume you know what motivates them. You have to actually ask them what motivates them. And that was a strange concept to me that I learned in probably 2011. Servant leadership is what I call that, where I've actually learned what are you looking for, and let me help you get there, as opposed to here's what I think you need to do.
Right.
That was a big moment for me. So I don't know. Did you have any specific people that taught you leadership? Did you read a book? How did you ultimately figure that out?
Yeah, I have to admit, I've not been much of a business book reader. I read a few, the usual ones, but I've had a couple of really good bosses, and particularly one that I worked a long time with in Switzerland, who he was very sharp, very human, and super hard worker, and just a good communicator, and much better than I am. But I was trying to learn from him, and he, I used to have a bit of a temper, and he did not, right? So he was very calm, and I had to really push buttons to get him to speak up, so to speak, or get the high voice in. But there's been a couple of people that I really have learned from in sort of the people management side, and then I worked for some people who has been some of the smartest people I ever met, or I ever met, but they were a terrible manager. They were just real hard noses, and using language that I couldn't repeat here frequently. But you kind of learn from them too, because they were so smart and they had such a drive, but they could have been a little bit more human in their execution. And I'm certainly not the best there. tell that right away, but I matured a lot over the years. I can tell you that. I mean, now I have a lot of people tell me I would have left this company if you weren't here and stuff like that, and that makes me feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to know that you're impacting people's lives in a
Right.
positive way and they actually want to hang out with you.
Right.
I'm still trying to figure out, and the reason I dig so much into the leadership aspect is if you're going to progress and go to your title, you have to learn how to become a good leader, or
Yeah.
you're just going to have constant churn in your organization, and that's going to cause everybody problems. So I'm trying to figure out, is leadership innate? Is leadership that you have to learn? Is it something that you have to learn? I'm still trying to dig that out and figure out what is the genesis of leadership. I think there are some people that are natural born leaders, visionaries. I am not one of those. And I know where my limitations are. So I had to learn how to be a good leader. So I'm
Yeah.
always trying to figure that out.
I definitely think there's some people who are natural leadership talent, just like I have a natural talent for anything else. But it doesn't mean that if you don't have that, as much you can't become a leader. I mean, there's a lot of leaders in any organization, regardless of size, right? So I think there's way to learn it, and there's different ways to learn. Some people learn by reading leadership books and they get inspirations or ideas or things they can implement through that, or others are learning from watching what other leaders are doing, or getting that, or go to leadership training for that matter, right? There's plenty of that out there, right? But you have to want to be a leader too, right? It has to come from the inside. Whether you have a lot or not so much talent for it, it matters, but not as much as you think. I think if you really want to become a leader, you can become a leader, if you want it.
Yeah.
But you have to want it too.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
Because it is work.
Right. Oh yeah, it's definitely work, right? And you dealing with people is some of the hardest things, right? Because it's work problems, it's private problems, it's all, have to, you're dealing with human beings,
Mm-hmm.
and with all the good and the bad that comes with that.
So what is there anything that you would go back and tell your younger self?
Well, other than the language, learning more languages, I think maybe if I've had had toned it down in certain situations, but also I had so much passion and I wanted perfection so badly, right? So it's like, yeah, I was so driven and wanted the best for the company all the time, but maybe I was probably run over some people in the process, and I can't change that now. And I know I matured a lot, and over the years, at least that's the feedback I get, especially from my wife. But
That's
I think
some of the best. That's like looking in the mirror right there.
but you know what?
That's
You got to
some of
learn
the
through
best.
mistakes too, right? Nobody, it just is a natural leader and it just progresses. I mean, everyone you have to make mistakes to learn from it. I think it's super important. And I made my fair share of those, and hopefully I learned something from it. But I think it's important to try, and decision making is something that always comes very natural to me. I'll make decisions as quickly as I can, and if I have good information, great. If I don't, I still make a decision. Or occasionally I will tell that person, I'm not ready to make the decision right now because I need to find out X, Y, and Z. But again, I'm very direct about that. I'm not sort of trying to hide that, I can't make the decision because I don't know everything. I'll tell that to people, like, no, you can't get a decision right now because I need to find this out. But at the same time, I not love execution and just move forward. We'll learn from mistakes, and unless they're completely fatal, it's okay.
That's fantastic. Too many people are afraid to make a decision because they're worried about making that mistake and
Right.
looking bad. But taking ownership of it and learning from it, I think that's the whole you tell your kids, don't do this, and do this, do that. And what do? They do it anyways.
Right.
And then you just have to accept that because that's really, truly the only way that you're going to
Right.
learn.
Yeah, I believe it's leaders who can't make decisions or take too much time and information. They will either work themselves out of that job or they will take the organization down with them.
Mm-hmm. So envision right now you're talking to somebody that's starting out early on in their career. They want to achieve a CFO title. They already know that. You have the opportunity to kind of give them, a roadmap and some advice. you've given a lot of that through this podcast, but let's kind of summarize that of what you would tell this individual that wants to become a CFO eventually.
Right. I think, get an education as high as you can. Find an industry that you either are or think you can be really passionate about. And then, I'd say it, right, but work hard, but also work smart. Be strategic in your thinking, and then try to find one or a couple of mentors. I think that's the one thing I could have really benefited from when I was young. It's like, have somebody I can talk to who's not my boss or somebody outside, right? If you can find a mentor that can help you, and you should probably have a couple, because it's not necessarily that one is right about everything, right? So if you can have a couple that you can talk to, I think that's tremendously helpful, especially when you're young. Even when you're, advancing your career, there's still, you don't know everything. I certainly don't. And sometimes it's good to talk to people who either have done what I'm doing or have an understanding what I'm doing, and you just seek advice. So I think that is probably one area I wish I had when I was younger, for sure. A really good mentor, or a couple of them.
That is some of the most amazing advice, and so succinct. And if somebody could listen to that and implement that in their careers, that's so important.
Right.
So if you can believe it, our time is up. It's been almost an hour. That's how much time flies when you're passionate about what you're talking about.
Yeah.
and you're having a good time, and your passion is a gift. Any company that was able to get that passion, harness that passion, you were a gift to all those organizations. So it's been great to listen to you and learn about what drives you. So I really appreciate you sharing your time with us today.
Thank you, Chad. It's my pleasure being here. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. So if there's some individuals that are listening to this and they have additional questions, or they wanted to ping you on something, how would you suggest they get in touch with you?
Please reach out via LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest and quickest way.
Okay. And I'll give a hint. If they go to your LinkedIn, at the very top of your LinkedIn is a picture of a golf course. And so probably a quick way to start a conversation with you is maybe to bring up golf, huh?
That I can talk golf a lot.
I learned you have one more hole in one than I do. I only have one.
I got two, but you know what? It's all luck, though, right? It's skill to get it close, but that little extra interest there, that's all luck.
Absolutely. So, well, anybody can get a hold of me. Just Google Chad Dean, Integrated Management. I pop up number one. If I don't, I got to get a hold of Google and talk to them a little bit about it. But and I'm also on LinkedIn as a recruiter. I, for better or worse, live on LinkedIn. And so you can reach me pretty much there anytime. So that's it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Financial Footsteps. Thank you very much, Ingmar, for your time, and look forward to talking with you more.
Thank you.